In this short video, I'm going to take you through some tips on bringing together the evidence, the first step of the Be Alert process. Now, the first question that often comes up when you refer to bringing together the evidence is what evidence? At this point, you have to remind yourself that the customer has taken time out of their day to come to your service department because they're convinced they've got a problem. And this can only be based on the fact that they've experienced some sort of symptoms. If you look up symptoms in a dictionary, it describes them as a sign or indication of something acting as evidence. Now, sometimes these symptoms are obvious. Maybe the vehicle is misfiring or leaking fluid, and this obviously helps you to locate the fault. But what about those jobs we all love where they turn up and the fault is no longer present? This is when we must ensure we gather all the evidence that's convinced the customer that they've got a problem. So, the most common question that pops up at this point is, where do I start? Now, clearly, to find out what symptoms the customer has experienced, you need to ask them questions. But what we don't want to do is waste their time by just asking them random questions. You need to be asking questions in a structured way. You need to be finding out about specific information. You need to ask them questions that lets them talk freely and describe what it is they've experienced. And you also need to make sure that your questioning leaves no stone unturned. It's worth pointing out that the Be Alert process is partly built on hindsight, because when we analyse why a job has become a problem job and took too long to diagnose, we can then see what we should have done to avoid this. Bringing together the evidence correctly is one of the main reasons that jobs turn into problem jobs. So, on to the killer question. How do I start? One of the pieces of information that you must establish is when the customer started experiencing this problem. This is known as the change point, and it's the point at which the performance of part of the vehicle, let's say the engine, suddenly dropped. This could also be the air conditioning or anything else. Now, hindsight tells us that the change points can commonly be since a vehicle has had either an accident, or maybe a service has been carried out, or maybe they've had a new windscreen or accessory fitted. Have you ever had a similar experience of when you say, oh, you never mentioned this problem started ever since it came back from the body shop? It's a classic case of hindsight, and something that you can make sure doesn't catch you out again by using the Be Alert process and asking the customer about when the fault started. Bear in mind that sometimes they won't have a change point. This could be because it's a normal feature of the vehicle, or maybe they've just purchased the car like this. So, to get all this information out of the customer, we need to use the correct type of question techniques. This is achieved by using open questions. These are typically questions that don't require a yes or no answer. Open questions therefore get the customer to think about and describe the fault in their own words. Open questions typically start with what or when, where, who, why or how. Remembering which open questions you should ask can be made easier by the phrase 5 bums on a rugby post. This is a reminder of the 5 W's that you need to ask, and the rugby post being the H of the how. So use open questions to find out about the environmental conditions in which the fault occurs, such as day, night, hot, cold and things like that. It's important not to interrupt the customer when answering or try and finish their answers for them. Just let them explain as much as they can. Collecting evidence can be compared to the collection of water, because you start off with a broad open question such as, when did you first notice these symptoms? This is a really good way of finding out the change point. Once this has happened and you've got the answers, this will inevitably lead you to asking more open questions. However, once you've got all this, you need to gain facts, and this is done by asking closed questions. Closed questions are questions that require a yes or no answer. Here's a good example of a closed question. So, does it only occur in wet weather? A good example of how to finish this off then is by paraphrasing. Paraphrasing is basically when you say what the customer has said to you back to them in the form of a question. It's a very, very effective way of making sure that you've not misunderstood them, you're clarifying what they mean, and you're gaining the customer's confidence. A really good example of paraphrasing is, so what you're saying is, it only happens when you drive in wet weather. It's at this point they might say, well, no, that's not what I'm saying, and correct you, or they'll say, yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. So with all this questioning on board, the evidence is starting to pile up, but there's other evidence that you can get. With the information that you've got so far, it's now really relevant to ask the customer if they can demonstrate the fault to you. If they can't, don't worry, you should carry out a full function test of the vehicle. You may find that testing all the vehicle proves that other faults have gone unnoticed. For example, a cigarette lighter might not be working and the customer never realised. Again, more evidence that might lead you to the problem. The answer to the questions make it more likely for you to make the fault to reoccur, so you can do the functions test when the vehicle is wet or in cold weather, for example. Another thing you can do for additional sensors is use your own personal sensors, looking for damage or wear, maybe spilt drinks or a wet carpet. Smelling for signs of excessive heat, such as burnt transmission oil or clutch linings. Listening for signs of whistling, creaking, clicking or dripping, which a customer may think is normal. Feeling for signs of unusual bumps or bulges, hot pipes that should be cold, cold parts of the engine that should be hot, all very useful. You should also, now with this pile of evidence, make sure you haven't overlooked a TPI that's relevant, and also look up the vehicle history and see what jobs this vehicle has had on it before. A really important point though while doing all this is don't destroy the evidence. Again, the Be Alert process is built on hindsight, and a classic fault that we've seen recently is where a customer is going absolutely crazy with a fault that occurs every day but can never be reproduced in the workshop. Just so happens that every time the technician brings the vehicle into the workshop, he slides the seat back because he's considerably taller than the customer, but when the seat is slid forward again by the customer, the fault reoccurs. So, in summary, how am I going to remember all this? Make sure you try and start off by finding the change point. When did the fault start occurring? Make sure you find this out by using open questions to let the customer talk, and then nailing the facts with closed questions. If you can't remember what questions to ask, remember the 5 bums on a rugby post. Do a function test, or preferably get the customer to demonstrate the fault to you. Use your sensors, see if you can smell, see or hear anything of relevance. Make sure you check TPIs and job cards, and this way you will have a great big pile of evidence. But finally, one more point. It really doesn't matter who gathers this evidence so long as somebody does it. Now, if you're following a service call process, it's common practice that the service advisor will speak to the customer. It doesn't mean that they shouldn't be collecting evidence. You could pass them the Be Alert pad and let them capture down the information that we've just spoke about. This has got all the reminders of the 5 bums on the rugby post and the things that it should be asking. However, if the service advisor has not asked the questions that you prefer at stage 3 at customer check-in, this is your chance to ask those questions. Without this evidence, it's pointless trying to carry on, because you're going to overlook something. Hindsight's proved that to us. However, with this pile of evidence, you're ready to go on to step 2 of the Be Alert process. And when you nail the whole process, you will fix this car right first time and help Volkswagen Group achieve their targets in right first time fix. Thanks for listening to this short video. Please help yourself to the other 5 videos.